So hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be speaking about the perfect continuous forms. We almost finished with the passive voice. We have been speaking about the passive voice for the past few videos. This time I tried to pre-order everything so that it makes more sense, and I lose a little bit less time trying to do the colors and everything. Okay, so as you remember, on the last 3 or 4 videos, we have been speaking about the passive voice. We were speaking about when to use it, how to use it, how does it work. We were also speaking about how to change any sentence in the simple present, simple past, and simple future into the passive voice. Also, how to change sentences from continuous forms, the present continuous, the past continuous, and the future continuous, into the passive form. Also, perfect forms, present perfect, past perfect, and future perfect into the passive voice. And today we're going to be checking the last 3 time tenses. We had 12, and these are the last 3. The continuous perfect continuous or perfect continuous or perfect progressive time tenses. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted. Okay, so the perfect continuous forms or the perfect progressive forms. The name is not really important. Some books call them perfect continuous. Other books call them perfect progressive. It is pretty much the same thing. So an important thing that we were saying, this is an important thing that we started speaking about from the beginning, from the very first episode or video. We were saying that every sentence in English has the same structure. Okay, so whenever you have an affirmative statement, you need subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement, right? When you are using the passive voice, it's exactly the same. You need your subject, your auxiliary, your verb, and your complement. The only difference is that, well, the receiver of the sentence, the receiver of the action of the verb, will be the subject. The auxiliary will be the verb to be conjugated to any time tense. The verb is always in the past participle, and the complement, well, it is always optional, but we have something called the agent, which is the doer of the action, and we can use it as a complement in the passive voice. Again, today we're going to be speaking about continuous forms, or perfect continuous forms. Another important thing is that we know that to make negatives, the auxiliary takes the negative. In the case of the passive voice, the auxiliary is the verb to be. The verb to be takes the negative. The verb to be conjugated, right? Because, the auxiliary for the passive voice is the verb to be, but it has to be conjugated, right? So this one is the one that takes the negative. If you have a negative statement, this takes the negative, this takes the negative, and this takes the negative. Yep. If you want to make a question, you need to alter the order. You don't have subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. You have auxiliary first, and then subject, verb, and complement. The auxiliary will be the verb to be, is switching positions with the subject. First the auxiliary, and then the subject, okay? Then we have here again, the verb to be, it will be changing positions with the subject to make questions. So this is something that we know. Now, let's speak about the perfect continuous time tenses. We have the present perfect continuous, the past perfect continuous, and the future perfect continuous. I have a few things so that we can understand when to use the present perfect continuous. The present perfect continuous is used for routines that started in the past and continue to the present. If you say something like, I have been going to the gym, it means I started going to the gym in the past. In the past, I started going to the gym, and today I continue to go to the gym. Maybe 3 months ago, I started to go to the gym, and today I continue to do that. So I started going, I have been going to the gym for 3 months. I continue to do that, okay? So again, because this is a sentence in the active voice, we need to start with the subject. Let me just change that. We need to start with the subject, and you know that the subject, sorry, I couldn't, it was not the proper tool. Okay. The subject, as you remember, in the active voice, the subject is the doer of the action. The doer of the action is the subject. You can use the noun, the name of the person that is the subject, or if you want to replace it, you need to use a personal pronoun. In this case, Daniel is the third person of the singular, so you can change him for he. You can use he, replace it with he. Okay? Then we need the auxiliary for the for the present perfect continuous. What is the auxiliary for the present perfect continuous? Well, in the perfect continuous or perfect progressive tenses, we need the auxiliary have been or to have been. This has to be in the present. This has to be in the present, in the past, and in the future. In the case of the present perfect, well, it is called the present perfect. So we need the auxiliary to be in the present. Have been in the present has two forms. It can be has been in the third person of the singular, or it can be have been in the rest of the persons. In this case, we have the third person of the singular is he, so the auxiliary is has. We have one and two words. Has is conjugated to the subject. This is the present perfect continuous. The third person takes an S. Okay. Then we have the verb. The verb, as you remember, when we have perfect continuous forms, a verb is always in the gerund. With perfect forms, is in the participle. With perfect continuous and with continuous form, is in the gerund. So all the verbs are going to finish with ing to make the perfect continuous forms. And then the complement is any extra information. Again, we can have, we can have we can have complements of time, complements of place, complements of how or way, complements of many different ways or many different forms. In this case, we have an object. I don't know if you remember, but an object is a person, is a noun. This Paula is a noun. Nouns can be the subject. Daniel is also a noun. They can be the subject or the object on a sentence. The object is the receiver of the action of the verb. This is the verb. Daniel has been painting. Painting is the action, and Paula is the receiver of the action. Because she is the receiver, she is called the direct object. She's an object. And if we want to replace the noun Paula, we can use an object pronoun. When we replace Daniel, we use a personal pronoun. When we replace Paula, we use an object pronoun. Why? Because subjects are replaced by personal pronouns and objects are replaced by object pronouns. Okay, super simple. So we have Daniel has been painting Paula. So he started painting Paula in the past and he continues to paint Paula. Maybe he started 6 hours ago and he has been doing that for 6 hours. Maybe it is a lot of work. Maybe he has like a lot of things to do. Okay, so he has been painting Paula. Another possibility is that Daniel has been painting Paula. Maybe he started painting her 3 years ago, and today they continue to meet and he continues to paint her. So maybe he has been painting her for 3 years or since December. Okay, this is the present perfect continuous, something that started in the past and continues in the present. Okay, now how do we change this into the passive voice? Remember that in the passive voice, the subject is not going to be the doer of the action. In the passive voice, the subject is going to be a little different because the subject is going to be the receiver of the action. The receiver of the action is the subject. In this case, Paula was receiving the action of being painted. Now, Paula is the subject. In the active voice, Paula was the object and we replaced her with an object pronoun. In the passive voice, Paula is the subject And we replace her. If we want to use an pronoun, we use a personal pronoun. Okay? The next thing that we need, subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. So the next thing that we need is the auxiliary. The auxiliary, well, I erased them before time. I want to check, I want you to think about it. And sorry, I keep changing I keep changing the wrong tool. Okay, so the auxiliary should be here. It should be here. And I want you to think about it. And we're gonna get together to a conclusion. We're gonna find out what the auxiliary is for the passive voice in the perfect continuous tenses. The verb, as you remember, in the passive voice is always in the past participle. It is here in the rules. I don't know if my picture is blocking it, but don't worry, I will give you this. I will give you this presentation so that you have access to it and you can check it and study it. So this is it. Whenever you have passive voice, the verb is always in the past participle. Yeah. So we can even like do it in advance. The past perfect continuous has the verb in past participle. Sorry, the future perfect continuous has the verb in the past participle. It is always in the past participle. You're never going to change that. Okay. So, and in the end, when you have the sentence, at the end you have your complement. This is optional. That is why it's in between parentheses, because it is optional. Normally, Daniel, in the active voice, Daniel was the subject because he's the doer of the action. Here, he's the doer and he was the subject. In the active voice, we are speaking about the person or the thing doing an action. In the passive voice, the subject is the receiver. This is the subject. The subject is Paula. So Daniel is now a complement. And if we want to replace the word Daniel, if we don't want to use his name, if we want to replace this noun with a pronoun, we are going to use an object pronoun. So again, they switched. Paula was the object and we use an object pronoun in the active voice. Now Paula is the subject and we use a personal pronoun in the passive voice, and the other way around. In the active voice, Daniel was the subject and we use a personal pronoun. In the passive voice, Daniel is the complement and we use an object pronoun. So we switch, they switch functions. The one that used to be the complement is now the subject. And the one that used to be the subject is now the complement, okay? So the only thing that we are missing right here is the auxiliary. So we need the auxiliary. The auxiliary is, as you remember, always the verb to be conjugated. So we need the verb to be, sorry, I'm gonna do this again with a different tool. We need the verb to be, you know what? Yeah, well, okay. The verb to be conjugated. We need the verb to be. This is the auxiliary of the passive voice. So how do we make the verb to be, but in present perfect continuous? Let's check. How do we make the present perfect continuous? You need the auxiliary have or has been. So in this case, we have or has been. And the verb that we are conjugating, in this case, in the active voice, it was the verb painting. It has to be, the verb has to be in gerund, painting, ing. So if we want to make a verb in the active voice, what we need is have or has been plus the verb with ing, okay? So now, if we want to use it for the passive voice, the auxiliary is have or has been. In this case, Paula is the third person of the singular, is she, so is she has been. She has been. And then what do we need? We need have been plus a verb in ing. It was the verb paint, but in this case, we don't need the verb paint. We need the verb to be. What is the verb to be in ing? Being. Being. So the auxiliary is 1, 2, 3 words long. Has been being or have been being. It looks like a little repetitive because it has the same verb, being, but this is part of the auxiliary. Remember that the auxiliary has been, and this is the verb to be in ing. So this is the way it has to work. Now, what is the difference in pronunciation between been and being? Okay, been in the past participle, like this, been is just one syllable. Yeah, been, just like one sound, been. If you are saying being, you have 1, 2 syllables. Being, been, being. Okay? I have, Paula has been being painted. The verb is in the past participle by Daniel. Paula has been being painted. It means in the past, Paula started to be painted, and today she continues to be painted. So it's something that started in the past and that continues to happen now. When you say Daniel has been painting Paula, and when you say Paula has been being painted by Daniel, it is essentially the same thing. The only difference is that in the active voice, you are making emphasis on the doer of the action, and in the passive voice, you are making emphasis on the receiver of the action. That's the only difference. Paula has been being painted, or she has been being painted. Okay, that's pretty much the way it works. Now, let's move on to the past perfect continuous. In the past perfect continuous, we need, when do we need it? When do we use it? The past perfect continuous is a routine that started in the past. In the past you started, but it doesn't continue. It is a little different because this is a routine that you had picked up, a routine that you had started to do, and now you stopped. I mean, for example, I was going to swimming classes. This is true. I was going to swimming classes. I started like 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. I started going to swimming classes, but the problem is with the pandemic and everything, I stopped going. So I haven't been going to going to the swimming classes in like 4 months. So I haven't been doing that. So in the past perfect, you say, I have been taking swimming lessons. I have been swimming. That means I started in the past, but I don't do it anymore. Like 2 years ago, I started swimming, but 3 months ago, I stopped swimming. So this is a routine that I used to have. And now, well, I can't do it anymore. So I don't do it in this moment. Okay. So we have, again, because this is an affirmative statement, we start with the subject. The subject in the active voice is the doer of the action. And we replace the subject with a personal pronoun, he. Daniel is he, okay? The auxiliary is always going to be the auxiliary have been. It's not has been, it's have been. It's the verb to have been, but in the past. In the present is has been or have been. In the past is always have been for every subject. Daniel have been. The verbs, if you remember the verbs in the perfect continuous forms, they are always in gerund. They are always with ing, painting. So we say painting. And then finally, we need a complement. The complement is whatever extra person. In this case, we have, well, it can be a complement of time, a complement of place, a complement of way. In this case, we have a complement called the object. An object is a person or a thing. It is a noun that is receiving the action of being painted, okay? Only when we have objects, we can change everything to the passive voice. If you don't have an object, you cannot make a sentence into the passive voice because the passive voice is focusing on the object, on the receiver of the action. If you don't have a receiver of the action, then you cannot use the passive voice. You have to use the active voice. In this case, luckily, we have an object. So we can make these sentences into passive voice. Remember that Paula is the object. She's not painting anyone. She doesn't have a pencil. She doesn't have any paint. She receives the painting. Maybe they paint on her. Maybe she's like the canvas, or maybe she's like the model and they are painting her. okay? When we replace Paula, because Paula is the object, we replace it with an object pronoun, her, not she. When we change to the passive voice, to the passive voice, when you change to the passive voice, now we don't focus on, we are not focusing on Daniel. We don't care about Daniel. Daniel is the doer of the action. In the passive voice, the important thing is not who does the action. The important thing is who receives. The receiver of the action is the subject in the passive voice. So the subject is Paula. Paula used to be the object and used to be switched for she used to be replaced by an object pronoun. Now she's the subject, and because she's the subject, you have to replace her with a personal pronoun. Okay. The next thing that we need is the auxiliary. We're gonna leave this for now, and then we need the verb. As you remember, the verb is always in the past participle. When you have the passive voice, the verb is always in the past participle. So painted, 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 always. This is a regular verb, so you don't really have to think that much. With other verbs, you need to just remember the regular verbs are a little harder, but you just need to memorize them. I will give you a list of verbs so you can check it. There are only like 20 or 30 verbs that you really, really need to learn. Yeah, the verb to be, been, the verb to go, gone, the verb to see, seen, the verb to become, is in past participle is also become, get is gotten, hit is hit, cut is cut, etc. I will give you the list, okay? In this case, it's regular, so we don't have to pay attention to that. And finally, we need to have a complement. Well, we don't need to have it. This is optional, but if you want, you can have a complement. In this case, Daniel is the doer of the action. He continues to be the doer of the action. In the active voice, the doer of the action was the subject. In this case, the doer of the action is a complement. He is not the important part. If we want, we don't even mention him. The important part is the receiver of the action. If you have Daniel here, then you can replace him by an object pronoun. In the active voice, he was a personal pronoun. In the passive voice, he is an object pronoun. So we switch that part. The only thing that we are missing is the auxiliary. So what is the auxiliary? The auxiliary is the verb to be, but conjugated in the past perfect continuous. So how do we make a verb in the past perfect continuous? We need the auxiliary. The auxiliary is always have been. Have been. And then we need a verb. This is the verb. And the verb is always in gerund, in ing. So how do we make a verb in the past perfect continuous? Is have plus been plus the verb in ing. In this case, we're going to do the same. We need have plus been plus a verb with ing. But the verb is not painting because we don't care about painting. The verb is to be. To be is the auxiliary for every passive form. So have been, being. Paula has been being, Paula had been being. Again, we have 1, 2, 3 words that are making the auxiliary, okay? She had been being. So, Paula had been being painted. She had been being painted. Paula había estado siendo pintada. O sea que en el pasado, en algún momento comenzaron a pintarla. Hace 2 años empezó Daniel a pintarla, pero ya dejaron de hacer eso. ¿Sí? Él la había estado pintando, la estuvo pintando por varios meses, pero ya acabaron, ya no la está pintando más. ¿Sí? She had been being painted. Si decimos Paula had been being painted, es lo mismo que si dijéramos Daniel had been painting Paula. Entonces, Paula had been being painted by Daniel es lo mismo, solo que en la voz activa nos concentramos en quien hace la acción y en la voz pasiva nos concentramos en quien recibe la acción. Ese es el sujeto. ¿Sí? Muy sencillo. Ahora, what about the future perfect continuous? When do we use the future perfect continuous? Here. The future perfect continuous is a routine that will start in the future. This routine hasn't started. I will start taking my classes next week. Right now, I haven't started, okay? This is in the future. Next week, I will start my classes. And this routine will start in the future. It will start in the future. And also, it will continue at a further point in the future. So what is the meaning that? It means that en una semana yo voy a empezar a ir a una clase. Tengo mi clase de pintura y empiezo en una semana. Dentro de 2 meses, yo ya habré estado yendo a mi clase por 1 mes y medio. ¿Sí me explico? O sea, en una semana empiezo y en un punto más adelante en el futuro, en 2 meses, esto va a seguir pasando. ¿Sí? Entonces, yo mañana empiezo a dar clases de inglés y en 1 año habré estado dando clases por 1 año o por casi 1 año. ¿Sí? Este es el futuro perfecto continuo. Se utiliza para hablar de cosas que todavía no empiezan, pero en el futuro van a empezar y más adelante en el futuro van a seguir. ¿Sí? Es algo así como acciones que van a estar en progreso, o más bien que van a estar sucediendo en un futuro más adelante. Más o menos así es como funciona. En ese caso, okay, let's check. How do we make a sentence in the future perfect continuous? We need the subject. Always we need the subject. And remember that in the active voice, this is the active voice, the subject is the doer of the action. The subject is the person with the paint and with the pencil. In this case, is Daniel. If we want to replace him, we use a personal pronoun, he. Okay? The next thing that we need is the auxiliary. The auxiliary of the present perfect continuous have been in the present. So have been or has been. The past perfect continuous have been, but in the past, have been. The future perfect continuous have been, but in the future. We cannot say have been in the future. The only way to do that is to say will have been. Yes, will have been. My auxiliary for the future is will have been. My auxiliary has 1, 2, 3 parts. Will have been. And the verb, when we have perfect continuous forms, the verb is always with ing. Ing, ing, ing. And the complement, in this case, the object, is Paula. Paula is the receiver, is the person or the thing. It is a noun. Sorry. It is a noun that is receiving the action of being painted. This is called the object. And objects are substituted for object pronouns if we want. This is optional, okay? If we want to substitute Paula, we use an object pronoun. Normally, the passive voice is impossible. The only way to use the passive voice is if we have an object, because the passive voice is focusing on the object. In this case, we have an object, so this sentence can be transformed into the passive voice. In the passive voice, we don't really care about the doer of the action. The important thing in the passive voice is the receiver of the action. So the subject is not Daniel. We don't care about the doer. We care about the receiver. The receiver of the action is the subject, and because Paula is the subject, if we want to replace her with a pronoun, we use a personal pronoun, okay? The personal pronoun will be she, because it is feminine, and it is the third person of the singular. The verb, as you remember, well, the auxiliary, as you remember, is here. We're gonna check it in a moment, and the verb is always in the past participle. When you have a verb in the in the passive voice, that is always in the past participle. Finally, the final thing that we need is a complement, and well, we don't really need it. This is optional. In this case, again, we can add a complement of time, a complement of place, a complement of way, or an agent. What is the agent? The agent is the doer of the action. Yes, the doer of the action in the active voice was the subject. In the passive voice is just a complement. because it is a complement and is not the subject, if we want to replace Daniel by a pronoun, we use an object pronoun. We use him, okay? Paula painted him. This is what we say. Well, Paula painted him, that is like in the active voice. It's like Paula is painting. But in the passive voice, we need to change this to the passive voice. So to change this to the passive voice, the only thing that we need is the auxiliary. So what is the auxiliary for the future perfect continuous in the passive voice? Les prometo que no vamos a hacer esto muchas veces, probablemente no lo vean mucho, pero para mí es muy importante terminarlo porque a pesar de que lo van a ver 2 o 3 o 4 veces en su vida, si deciden ponerse a leer cosas en inglés, no es muy común, pero es importante porque nos deja ver cómo las reglas se cumplen. Todo esto desde el principio se sigue cumpliendo y todo lo que hemos venido haciendo lo podemos seguir haciendo, ¿sí? Aquí para mí es importante que nosotros podamos con nuestra cabeza empezar a notar cómo funcionan estos patrones, a reconocer los patrones, a empezar a imaginar qué es lo que puede seguir, a predecir, y entonces es cuando emprendemos la estructura. Y acuérdense, el inglés es casi pura estructura. Si ustedes se aprenden la estructura, ya fregamos. Entonces vamos a intentarlo. What is the auxiliary for the future perfect continuous? The auxiliary for the future perfect continuous is the verb have been, but in the future. So it is will have been. Acuérdense que will nunca se conjuga porque es un modal, entonces no es wills, aunque sea he, nunca se conjuga. Acuérdense que have siempre va en forma base porque va después de un modal. Después de los modales los verbos no llevan s, aunque sea he, no llevan de, no llevan ing, no llevan nada de eso, siempre es will have. Y el verbo, en este caso, nuestros verbos en el have been, bueno, siempre está en participio. Entonces, will have been es inamovible. No vamos a moverle a ninguno de estos tres sin importar la persona. Y después, ¿qué hicimos? Agarramos un verbo y ese verbo lo pusimos en ing. En ese caso, es un verbo en gerundio y eso, así es como se conjuga un verbo en futuro perfecto continuo. En este caso, el verbo paint, ¿cómo lo conjugamos en futuro perfecto continuo? Will have been painting. Esto es lo que necesitamos como el auxiliar de nuestra voz pasiva. La única diferencia es que no necesitamos el verbo paint. El auxiliar de la voz pasiva, otra vez, siempre es el verbo to be. Entonces, ¿cómo ponemos esto? Tendríamos que poner will have been. Acuérdense que este nunca cambia, will have been. Y después el verbo to be, pero con ing. Being. Will have been being. Bienvenidos a los auxiliares de 4 palabras. Esta es la primera vez que estamos inaugurando un auxiliar que está hecho de 4 palabras. ¿Sí? Este es el futuro perfecto continuo en voz pasiva. Yo sé que no esperaban llegar a esto dentro del curso. Espero que les sirva. ¿Cómo pondríamos el otro? She, igual. Will have been being. ¿Sí? Para que no suene tan repetitivo, algo que podemos hacer es decir, Paula, this is the contraction, Paula have been being painted. That's, it sounds more normal, not to say 4 different words. Y así es como hacemos la voz pasiva en futuro perfecto continuo. Aquí dice, Daniel ha estado pintando a Paula. Paula ha estado siendo pintada por Daniel. Él ha estado pintando a ella, él la ha estado pintando, ella ha estado siendo pintada por él. Eso quiere decir que hace un tiempo empezaron a pintarla y ahora continúan pintándola. Ahora, el pasado perfecto continuo, Daniel había estado pintando a Paula, Paula había estado siendo pintada por Daniel. Él la había estado pintando, ella había estado siendo pintada por él. Otra vez, esto quiere decir que en el pasado empezaron a pintarla, pero ya dejaron de pintarla, ¿sí? El futuro perfecto continuo, Daniel habrá estado pintando a Paula, Paula habrá estado siendo pintada por Daniel. Habrá estado siendo pintada por Daniel. ¿Ok? Él habrá estado pintando a ella, o él la habrá estado pintando, ella habrá estado siendo pintada. Ese es el futuro perfecto continuo. Eso significa que apenas van a empezar a pintarla y que más adelante en el futuro van a seguir pintándola. De eso se trata la voz pasiva. Ahora, como les habíamos dicho, como les había dicho, creo que podemos hacer esta parte. ¿Cómo se hace en un negativo o cómo se hace una pregunta? El auxiliar se lleva el negativo, el auxiliar se lleva la pregunta. En voz activa es muy sencillo, tenemos dos partes. El auxiliar, solo la primera parte se lleva el negativo. Entonces decimos hasn't. Daniel hasn't been painting Paula. O he hasn't been painting Paula. Él no ha estado pintando a Paula. Y si quisiéramos hacerlo pregunta, otra vez tenemos dos partes. Solo la primera, la que se llevaría el negativo, es la que cambia su lugar con el sujeto. Y diríamos, ¿has Daniel been painting Paula? Yes, he has, or no, he hasn't. ¿Has he been painting her? Yes, he has, or no, he hasn't. Perfecto. ¿Cómo lo hacemos con el tiempo continuo? Aquí tenemos tres palabras en nuestra auxiliar. Otra vez el negativo se lo lleva la primera. Paula hasn't been painted. She hasn't been painted. Ella no ha estado siendo pintada. Paula no ha estado siendo pintada. ¿Qué pasa si queremos hacer una pregunta? Otra vez, solo la primera parte del auxiliar cambia su lugar con el sujeto. ¿Sí? Solo la primera parte del auxiliar cambia su lugar con el sujeto y entonces ya tenemos una oración de pregunta. Es una pregunta de sí o no. ¿Has Paula been painted by Daniel? ¿O has she been painted by him? ¿Ha estado ella siendo pintada por él? Esta es una pregunta de sí o no. Si quieren hacer una pregunta de información, solo agreguen un question word antes. Why has she been painted by him? ¿Por qué ha estado siendo ella pintada por él? Y entonces la respuesta será un because. Les van a decir por qué. Si preguntan, when has she been painted by him? ¿Cuándo ha estado siendo pintada? Entonces le responderán el tiempo. Si ustedes preguntan, where has she been painted by him? ¿Dónde ha estado siendo pintada ella por él? Y entonces les responderán el lugar. ¿Sí? Así hacemos preguntas y así hacemos preguntas de información con un question word antes. ¿Cómo le hacemos en el pasado perfecto? En el pasado perfecto, en la voz activa, tenemos otra vez una, dos partes. El negativo se lo lleva a la primera, entonces sería hadn't. Daniel hadn't been painting Paula. Daniel no había estado pintando a Paula. He hadn't been painting her. Él no la había estado pintando a ella. ¿Sí? ¿Qué pasa? Si lo queremos hacer pregunta, otra vez, tenemos dos partes. Solo la primera cambia su lugar con el sujeto. Had Daniel been painting Paula? Yes, he had, or no, he hadn't. Had he been painting her? ¿Había él estado pintándola? Sí, sí lo había hecho. Yes, he had, or no, he hadn't. ¿Sí? En voz pasiva es un poco más difícil porque son tres palabras, 1, 2 y 3, pero otra vez es lo mismo. La primera es la que se lleva el negativo. Paula hadn't been painted by Daniel. She hadn't been painted by him. Ella no había estado siendo pintada por Daniel. Ella no había estado siendo pintada por él. Si queremos hacer una pregunta, nuestra primera palabra del auxiliar es la que cambia su lugar con el sujeto. Had Paula been painted by Daniel? Had she been painted by him? Yes, she had. Or yes, she had been. No, she hadn't been. Is it good? El futuro perfecto, lo mismo. Tenemos tres palabras, solo la primera se lleva el negativo. En lugar de decir Daniel will have painted, Daniel will have been painting Paula, we say Daniel won't have been painting Paula. Or he won't have been painting Paula. Él no habrá estado pintando a Paula. ¿Ok? O él no la habrá estado pintando a ella. ¿Qué hacemos si hacemos una pregunta? La primera de las tres palabras es la que cambia su lugar con el sujeto, ¿sí? La primera de las tres palabras es la que cambia su lugar con el sujeto. Will Daniel have been painting Paula? Will he have been painting her? Aquí lo dije mal. Will Daniel have been painting Paula or will he have been painting her? ¿Habrá Daniel estado pintando a Paula o habrá él estado pintándola a ella? ¿Sí? Ese es el futuro perfecto en voz activa. Ahora, el futuro perfecto en voz pasiva, en pregunta y en negativo, bueno, les dije, inauguramos el auxiliar de 4 palabras, pero la regla es la misma. La primera palabra se lleva al negativo, entonces diríamos, Paula won't have been painted by Daniel. O she won't have been painted by him. Ella no habrá estado siendo pintada por él. Paula no habrá estado siendo pintada por Daniel. Es la misma cosa. Siempre es igual. Es muy predecible. ¿Cómo hacemos una pregunta? Piénsenlo 2 segundos. Invertimos el auxiliar y el sujeto, ¿verdad? Pero no invertimos todo el auxiliar y el sujeto. Nada más la primera palabra. Igual que con todo lo demás. Este es es un auxiliar de 4 palabras, pero funciona exactamente igual que todos los demás. Solo la primera se cambia. Will Paula have been painted by Daniel? ¿Habrá Paula estado siendo pintada por Daniel? Will she have been painted by him? ¿Habrá ella estado siendo pintada por él? Así es como funciona la voz pasiva en los 12 tiempos. ¿Sí? Presente simple. Paula es pintada. Pasado simple, Paula fue pintada. Futuro simple, Paula será pintada. Los tiempos continuos. Presente continuo, Paula está siendo pintada. Pasado continuo, Paula estaba siendo pintada. Futuro continuo, Paula estará siendo pintada. Los tiempos perfectos. Paula ha sido pintada. Pasado perfecto, Paula había sido pintada. Futuro perfecto, Paula habrá sido pintada. ¿Sí? Y los tiempos perfectos continuos en el presente, Paula ha estado siendo pintada, Paula había estado siendo pintada y Paula habrá estado siendo pintada. Con esto acabamos la voz pasiva en los 12 tiempos. Nosotros sabemos cómo funcionan todos estos tiempos, tanto en voz activa como en voz pasiva. Se pueden relajar, acabamos de pasar una parte bastante grande, no se preocupen, el examen no incluye todo esto, pero el chiste es que ustedes vean cómo funciona el idioma, que ustedes vean cómo cada una de estas piezas tiene un lugar. Y lo que hace al idioma, por si no me lo creyeron al principio, lo he repetido 10 veces y lo voy a repetir otras 10, lo que hace al idioma no son las palabras, lo que hace al idioma es la estructura. Una vez que entendemos la estructura, pues solo es cuestión de hacernos de vocabulario. ¿Sí? Hay una cosa que es muy común cuando estamos aprendiendo un idioma y es que, bueno, se los dije en los primeros capítulos, pero a lo mejor ahorita tiene un poco más de sentido, un poco más de impacto. Una cosa que pasa es que la gente cae en un estado mental, en un círculo vicioso, donde es muy difícil salir. Pienso, no me gusta el inglés. Me obligan a tomarlo y no me gusta, no lo entiendo. Como no lo entiendo, pues nunca lo practico. Nunca lo hago en mi casa, nunca intento ver un video, nunca intento hacer nada por mi cuenta. Como nunca lo practico, pues no mejoro. Como no mejoro, pues me va muy mal en las clases. Como me va mal en las clases, pues odio el inglés. Es la materia que odio. Como la odio, no la hago. Como la hago, no la practico. Como no la practico, no la mejoro. Como no la mejoro, me va mal. Como me va mal, la odio. Y nos vamos en ese círculo vicioso, ¿sí? Lo que hay que hacer es empezar a darle la vuelta y convertirlo en un círculo virtuoso. Ahora, espero que esto les sirva para entender un poquito cómo funciona el idioma. No vamos a pasar este semestre conmigo, se los prometo, no vamos a pasar todo el semestre viendo I do, she does. I don't, she doesn't. I did, he didn't. I didn't like, she doesn't like. No vamos a hacer eso. Creo que llevan muchos años haciendo eso. Para mí lo importante es que vean desde el principio hasta el final y que puedan saber cómo funciona el idioma. No espero que lo entiendan en una pasada. Lo bueno es que está en YouTube y lo pueden ver las veces que quieran. Lo importante es que ustedes vayan entendiendo cómo funciona la estructura, ¿sí? Porque si le empezamos a entender, nos empieza a gustar. O sea, yo no conozco a nadie que disfrute algo en lo que es muy malo. Si soy muy malo en algo, pues nunca quiero hacerlo. Pero si le empiezo a entender un poco, a lo mejor me empieza a gustar. Y si me empieza a gustar, a lo mejor lo empiezo a hacer por cuenta propia, sin que me obliguen. Y a lo mejor si lo empiezo a hacer, empiezo a mejorar. Y si mejoro, me va bien. Y si me va bien, me gusta. Y si me gusta, lo practico. Y si lo practico, lo mejoro. Y eso es darle la vuelta al ciclo de cómo funcionan las clases, de cómo funcionan los idiomas. Los idiomas son especialmente vulnerables a este ciclo. La buena noticia es que estamos bastante avanzados y creo que vamos a terminar el programa dentro de las 16 semanas que tiene el semestre, aunque sea de manera remota. Creo que tiene su lado bueno. Su lado bueno es que tenemos toda esta información que en el pizarrón me llevaría toda la clase a apuntar y ustedes sería muy fácil que se distrajeran y que no acabaran entendiendo nada de esto. El otro lado bueno es que se queda grabado y lo pueden ver todas las veces que necesiten. Así se acabe el semestre, pasen a sexto, así se acabe el siguiente semestre y se titulen, así estén 5 años después, pueden seguir viendo esto, pueden seguir practicando. Si hay alguna cosa que no entendieron bien, me la pueden preguntar. Si quieren otros ejemplos, otra explicación, ya saben cómo se llaman los temas, ya saben cómo buscarlos en YouTube, ya saben qué pedirle directamente a un maestro. Ese es el chiste, es la parte más importante de esta clase. Esa es la buena noticia. Ya avanzamos mucho y creo que sí vamos a acabar el curso. La mala noticia es que todavía no acabamos con la voz pasiva. Ya hicimos los 12 tiempos en la voz pasiva, pero acuérdense que además de los 12 tiempos hay modales y semimodales. Los modales y semimodales están en voz activa, también pueden estar en voz pasiva. Más adelante vamos a hacer ejercicios de lectura, vamos a leer un texto, voy a desmenuzar el texto y se van a dar cuenta qué tan común es que las ideas estén en voz activa, en voz pasiva, en presente, en pasado, en futuro, mezcladas de todo. En un texto real, todo está mezclado. Y todavía nos faltan ver los temas más interesantes. Viene la parte buena, vienen las cláusulas relativas, vienen las condicionales, viene el reported speech. Todo eso no se lo quieren perder, espero. Okay, so thank you very much. That's it for today. You can go and rest. I think you deserve it. Please don't hate me. I know there is a lot of information, but don't worry. The exam doesn't require you to know everything. Okay, so thank you very much. I think that's it for tonight. Today, I don't know. So see you later.